I'm back with another card design using the Simon Says Stamp Etched Greeting card kit. I'm Claudette with theycallmemartha.com. Let's get started making this cute card. For this card, I started by creating a 6x6 card base, and then I pulled 2 pieces of patterned paper from the kit that coordinated with each other, and also a piece of the vellum from the kit. The focal point of this card is going to be this circular frame. I wanted to use this stamp here, which kind of has a round shape, and nestle it right inside this frame, but I wanted to highlight the papers, so that's why I chose to incorporate the vellum here. The first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and stamp and emboss on our vellum. So I've just cut a piece of the vellum that is about 5 inches by, it's the 8.5, and we'll go ahead and trim this down. And I'm going to place this in my mini MISTI. Because I'm going to heat emboss, I'm going to go ahead and treat my paper with some anti-static powder. And then I'm going to use a Versamark ink to ink up our stamp. I'll probably stamp it twice to make sure I get a really good impression. So it's really important that you make sure that your paper is all the way down in this corner. And then I'm going to give that a good press. Let me do that one more time. Again, I'm making sure that my paper is in the corner so that when I stamp it again, it lines up. And when you're heat embossing on vellum, you want to make sure that your heat gun is hot before you bring it to the paper itself. Vellum is made out of plastic, so it's really important that you heat it as quickly as possible so that it doesn't melt. All right, so I'm just going to add some gold embossing powder, and I'm going to use the Brutus Monroe Gilded Gold powder. This is one of my favorites. Just love the way it melts, and I love the color when it's finished. All right, I'm going to make sure that my heat gun is nice and hot, and then I'll melt this powder. While that's cooling down, let me talk about the frame that I made for the card. So to make the frame for the front of the card, I wanted a circular frame, but the only dies I had actually cut just circles. So what I did was I put 2 together using some low tack adhesive to make this frame. Now the key is here, you want to make sure that you keep the 2 dies together for every frame that you cut so that they line up perfectly. So here I'm just going to add this to my cardstock, run it through my die cut machine, and then I'll have the frame. Then I'm going to use the outer frame to cut 1 sheet of the patterned paper, and then I'm going to use that same outer frame to cut our vellum. I've centered the larger of the 2 circle dies on my vellum paper, and I'm just going to hold it down with some low tack tape while I run it through my die cut machine. Now I'm going to use the same circular die to cut my patterned paper. All right, now I have my patterned paper ready to go, my happy birthday sentiment, and now we can start building the card. So I'm going to start by gluing my card panel to the card base. I'm going to use some wet glue here so that I have some wiggle room to move it around and make sure that it lines up just right along the edges. I'm using some walnut stain distress ink just to go around the edges of my card. And then the next step is to glue your frames together to create some dimension, and this also adds some stability to the card as well. So I'm going to go ahead and glue these 3 layers together. All right, I've stacked all three, and I'm just taking a minute to run my fingers around that frame just to make sure that it's lining up just right. Give it a good press so that my glue all dries in between the layers. Okay, now I want to glue my happy birthday sentiment to the back of my frame, but I do not want to use wet glue. Wet glue and vellum are not friends, so I always use like a tape runner or double-sided adhesive when working with vellum. So if vellum comes in contact with any kind of moisture like a wet glue, it will buckle, which is why I don't use wet glue at all on it. Okay, so I've added my double-sided adhesive around my frame, and now I'm just going to line up my sentiment. All right, then I want to glue my patterned paper behind the vellum, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to add double-sided adhesive instead of wet glue, and I'm just going to be careful to make sure that I'm adding it just along the edge because I don't want it to show through the front of the vellum. All right, now I'm going to line up my paper in the back. Now I'm going to use some narrow double-sided foam to attach the frame to the card base because I want to give it a little bit of dimension. What I'm going to do is pull off a good length of the tape and then remove the backer. And by doing this, it allows you to manipulate the tape around like the circular frame. If you leave that adhesive back on the foam, it doesn't want to turn. So this just allows you a little bit more flexibility to add your foam in a nice clean way to the back of your image here. All right. And now I can center this on my card front. To give this a little bit of extra detail, I'm going to use some of this deco foil. And I'm going to use the glue technique that I covered in one of my previous videos using this kit. If you haven't watched those, I will link them up above and in the video description. Between those two videos, there's 7 additional card designs using this great kit. Add a little bit of wet glue, and I'm just rubbing it with my finger here a little bit so that it spreads out and also becomes slightly tacky. And then I'm just going to lay that foil right on top of the glue and press. And what you end up with is a very distressed kind of gilded foiling. And I just like what little dimension that gives, what little character that gives without, you know, having to foil the whole thing. It's just a nice distressed addition of the foiling. Okay, now I want to add some extra details to the card to finish it up. And so what I did is I cut some flowers from one of the papers from the card kit, and I'm just going to glue them around the card here and there. And then I'm also going to incorporate some of the leaves from the ephemera pack. And there's some little birds. So I think I might just cut this one apart. And then what I like to do is I like to ink the edges of the ephemera so that it doesn't have such a stark white border. So I'm using that same walnut stain and just going over it with my blending brush. Do that to the other part as well. One little tip on these flowers, when you cut them out of a dark background, they can be kind of ivory colored or yellow. And what I like to do is just take a white ink, either pigment or dye based. I'm just going to run my finger over it. And I'm just adding that little bit of white to the top of the flower. And it really helps to kind of brighten it up a little bit while allowing the details of the paper to still show through. So I'm going to do that to all of my little flowers that I've cut out. All right, I'm going to glue the leaves first in this lower right-hand corner. And I know I'm covering up the gold that I added, but I'm just going to add some more kind of maybe down in this area. And then I'm going to add this butterfly with just a little bit of wet glue. And then I'm kind of folding up the wings a little bit. And then this leaf, I think I'm going to tuck up here in the opposing corner, just kind of on the card base itself. And then I'm going to layer in some of these little flowers that I fussy cut from the patterned paper. And let me see, I think I'll add some more flowers over here. Actually, I think I'll put that one over there. And this one over here. I think I'm going to pop this one up with a little bit of adhesive. Just going to use a very small foam dot. Right, and then I'm going to add a little bit more of that gold down here. And then to finish off this card, I think I want to add a little bit of my favorite product, probably I use on a lot of my cards, which is Stardust Stickles. And I'm just going to add a little bit of sparkle to the flowers. And maybe even down the middle of the leaf, here and there. And then the top of my butterfly here and there as well. Again, it's just to add that extra sparkle. And I think with that, our cute little birthday card is finished.